Shkoch, it's a pleasure to be here. I apologize, I did come a little late, but I wanted to speak, the topic I wanted to speak about is one of the most mysterious aspects of the whole Zman Simchosenu. And hopefully there can be a message of chizzuk to all of us wherever we are. But the message, the reason is, we know that throughout the Torah, throughout Chazal, we refer to it in our davenings, Sukkot is Zman Simchosenu, time of our joy. The Torah says, V'samachta b'chagecha, the Torah says about taking the Arba Minim, V'samachta nifnei Hashem shivas yomim. Every aspect of Sukkot is meant to be about Simcha. And that's why it's Zman Simchosenu. The curious element, because moving into Sukkah, there's enough different Torah as to why that's the thing that brings us Simcha, reminds us of, primarily I think the simplest pshat, by the way, is, let's tell you a small aside, just an interesting question. We know there's a machlokes in the Gemara, we're doing the Sukkahs to remember the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, in which case, why a Sukkah, right? It's an obvious question, but the other, according to the view that it's Sukkahs mamash, literally Sukkahs, so interesting thing is, number one, Hashem says, I put them in sukkahs. Presumably they built their own sukkahs, right? So what's the big deal? And number two is, where do we ever find in the Torah Bnei Yisrael living in sukkahs? If you scour the entire Torah, you'll always see the Enoi Holim. They're always intense. Bilam says, Matovu Ahalecha Yaakov. Everybody goes in an Ohel. Where's this issue of a sukkah? So on a very simple level, I'll tell you just, it's a small point, but it gets us in the mindset of where the simcha really comes from. There is a very explicit mention of sukkahs. It's the name of a place. That's it. They leave Ramses, they go to sukkahs. Now, why was sukkahs called sukkahs? It's not the only place in Tanakh called sukkahs. Yaakov Avinu comes back, right? He's coming across the Yabok River, and he arrives in a place called sukkahs. So we meet sukkahs more than once. They're not geographically the same place. Yaakov Avinu's is along the Yabok River. Later, Gidon will go there when he's chasing, when he has two Jewish towns that don't help him. One is Sukkot, one is Penuel. So they're clearly different places. And the simple answer is that in ancient times, there were travel routes. And in those travel routes, especially in the, let's say, 15th, 14th centuries, 13th century BCE, even earlier a little bit, there were Semitic travel routes into Egypt. And what you would have is gigantic campsites where potentially thousands of people could be there, and they'd have lots and lots of these sukkahs, and they'd be left for the next travelers to come in. In other words, what happened when the Bnei Yisrael left is they arrived in a place, archaeologically, just for those interested, it's called Sheku, in the Sinai desert. It's a place we call sukkahs, or they called sukkahs, because what it was a gigantic campsite with thousands and thousands of sukkahs, presumably loads of other materials. Maybe it's where Yaakov Avinu had planted the famous cedar trees or whatever. And they suddenly turn up. They've left Ramses with nothing. They had not thought what they're going to do that night. And suddenly they turn up, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepared centuries earlier a currently disused campsite, an enormous one, where they can all camp out that night. That's it. And what it told them is, even though you're going out with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, He's got you covered. Hashem says, here's what I prepared for you centuries earlier. And of course, from there, the Ananei HaKavod took over, bless you, which is why living in the sukkah reminds us of both. The first night, where there we were, and then after that, the accompanying clouds of glory. So in other words, sukkah brings back that joyful memory of going out in the desert, wanting to do whatever Hashem wants, saying to Hashem, we're for you, right, as we do on Seder night, and then immediately afterwards seeing that He's accompanying us on our journey. That's the Zman Simchosenu. Okay. And we can talk about Arba Minim too. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But the curious element is the Minhag Ashkenaz that the Ramah brings, that we say Koheles on Sukkot. Because of all the Sefarim in Tanakh, it's not the most obvious candidate to be the theme of Zman Simchosenu. So you could say, look, we've run out of Megillas. We've got a different one for every single other Yom Tov. We got stuck on Sukkot, so we plonked the last one in. But one presumes that's not, the Minhag has to have a little bit more to it than that. And the other interesting thing about Koheles, this bothered me for many years, it may have bothered you, is whatever exactly it's got to do with Simcha, what exactly is it trying to teach us? It seems, at least it seemed to me, that the whole of Koheles could easily have been summed up in two psukim. Havel avolim am HaKoheles, havel avolim HaKol Havel, and Soif Davar Kol Nishma, said Akim Yerovis Mitzvos Shmar Ki Zekol Adam. Just start by saying everything's meaningless, and conclude that you got to serve Hashem and do mitzvahs. That what is the rest of the Sefer doing? So there's a few nice divrei Torah, we get some psukim we can throw into some mussar here and there, but bottom line, what on earth happens between the second, halfway through the first parak, and the last? There seems to be no obvious journey, no obvious movement, not much that doesn't appear on a simple level to just be repeating itself. Everything else in life is a waste of time. Okay, how many times do you need to tell us that? So this bothered me so much that eventually I decided to do a project and see how did Chazal look at Koheles. Because what Chazal do, the problem when we learn Chazal in Midrashim and Gemaras is we don't get the big picture they're seeing. We just kind of pick a snippet in an Agadata here and in a halachic discussion there and a Medrash here and there. So I took upon myself to try and work through Koheles with every Chazal that I could find, certainly if starting primarily with the Gemara and the Koheles Rabba. And all of a sudden it became clear that Koheles in the eyes of Chazal is a journey. It's an actual step-by-step journey. And that, I think, is something that's so profound that it's worth us exploring. It turns out it has a lot to do with Simcha. It redefines the whole of existence and life. It redefines where we stand vis-a-vis moments we don't understand, and many other things as well. So I wanted to spend some time working through that on this Hoshana Rabba night, and hopefully it can give us some picture for everything, including some of the complex emotions we may be going through as well. So first of all, let's open with the obvious. The obvious question is who's the author, and the obvious answer is Shlomo Melech. But the obvious question on that is, so why doesn't he call himself Shlomo Melech? The reason it's got to be Shlomo Melech is because there aren't a lot of people who are Ben David Melech b'Yerushalayim, sons of David who ruled in Yerushalayim. Adonio came close, Avshalom had it a few days, but it's unlikely they're the ones writing the Sefer in past tense, because Avshalom didn't really live long enough after that to go and write this whole thing. So we're left with Shlomo Melech, and that's of course who Chazal tell us it is. Why would he call himself Koheles? So Koheles can refer to a few different things. Rashi brings some. One is that he is makil, he assembles a lot of wisdom. Could be, I mean that's a potential reason. There's a lot of wisdom in the Sefer. It could easily have called Mishlei Koheles then, but okay. The other is that in Melachim Aleph Perek Ches, he is makil. He's the one who assembles the Bnei Yisrael to have the Yom Tov of the Beis Hamikdash, and he does it over Sukkot. So that's another potential link over here. Okay, but why would he begin this Sefer by referring to himself as the one who had assembled the Bnei Yisrael in order to build the Beis Hamikdash? What's that got to do with the rest of the Sefer? Our next clue is the Gemara in Shabbos, which tells us that actually Koheles was something Chazal really genuinely conceived of excluding from the canon of Tanakh. Lots and lots of books were floating around at the time when they had to decide what really belongs in the permanent canon, religious canon of the Jewish people, and what's out. What's called Sfarim Chitzonim, the ones that are outside, what are the ones that are inside, what are the ones that are also to be Koreh, you're not allowed to be Koreh from Sfarim Chitzonim, you can't publicly read in the shul. The ones that are considered outside, these are the ones you do read from the shul. So what goes in, what goes out? And Koheles was a debated topic. Why was it debated? Because it's so full of contradictions. Okay, lots of other books in Tanakh have contradictions. And the Gemara tells us that the resolution, the reason it was readmitted, was because it began with Yiras Shamayim and ended with Yiras Shamayim. How did it begin with Yiras Shamayim? Because it says that what's the benefit, let's say, to man in all that he works? Tachas HaShamash, under the sun. Under the sun there's no benefit, but above the sun there is. In other words, maybe we can't impact things below the sun, we can impact above. And it finishes, Soif Tov HaKol Nishma, with that you've got to just do mitzvahs. So since it begins in Torah and ends with Torah, therefore it must be good. Then the Gemara shows us how they eventually managed to resolve the contradictions. But notice something fascinating there. We started with the problem of contradictions, and before we'd resolved the contradictions, we readmitted the Sefer into Tanakh. Because it begins with Torah and ends with Torah. The implication is that the Hava Mina, the reason we wanted to exclude it was not just that it was contradictions, but the assumption that at least its beginning, if not other parts, were not in a mindset called Torah or Yiras Shamayim or whatever it may be. The implication is, for some reason, Chazal suspected that the reason there's contradictions is different to the reason that there are in other books. It's because Shlomo Melech wrote this in different mindsets. in different states of mind, some of which are legitimate to be teaching us, and some of which are not. So we got a few clues, but actually seeming to create more problems for us. He's called Koheles, something to do with the Beis HaMikdash. What's that got to do with Koheles? There's contradictions where there was a genuine thought in the minds of Chazal that he started writing this in an inappropriate mindset for at least it to be considered a book of Tanakh. And then when we realized it was all in an appropriate mindset, we didn't worry about the contradictions. We were happy to keep them in. What's going on? And the real key to all of this is a fascinating and perplexing Gemara in Gittin Daf Samaches, a very famous Gemara, that tells us this intriguing story of Shlomo HaMelech, that if you listen carefully to it, is actually the story of the introduction to Koheles. What is the story? The story is Shlomo HaMelech wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash, hence the name Koheles, and he figured that since Hashem instructed the Moshe Rabbeinu that you can't have any metal and iron on the Mizbeach, in the construction of Mizbeach, how about we do that for the whole Beis HaMikdash? And so he wanted to build a Beis HaMikdash where you would not hear in its entire construction metal clanging against it. Where that means they'd go to the quarry and do the metal work, who knows, but the Gemara seems like we didn't even want that. And so the Gemara tells us that he decided he needs to be able to access the shamir, this incredible little organism, worm of some form exactly, that could cut through rock or whatever exactly it is that Moshe Rabbeinu had used. That's one of the things created between the Bein Hashmashos, between the 6th day and 7th of creation. And then he decides that the way to do that is he has to find his way above the Shadim. And that, says Chazal, explains, says the Gemara, one of the two possible interpretations in the 2nd chapter when Shlomo Melech is discussing all the things that he built. He refers to Shida v'Shidos, right? That he refers to these, now you could translate it as chests of treasure, but it's an unusual term, and Chazal say actually relates to Shadim, to demons, male and female. And what he did is he agitated these demons, says the Gemara, against each other and tried to get them to reveal where this Shamir is. And they said, we don't know, but you should go to the king of the demons called Ashmedai and he'll be able to help you. And there's a whole Gemara on this elaborate trap. Shlomo Melech sent off Binyamin ben Yehoyada, who is one of his generals in Tanakh, but is also a head of the Sanhedrin, say Chazal. And eventually he took a chain with Hashem's name and a whole trap, and eventually trapped this demon, and eventually got him to reveal the pathway. It's a whole long story in the Gemara. I'm not going to repeat it all now. But eventually they managed to get hold of this Shamir and build the Beis HaMikdash. When all was done, Shlomo Melech goes back to this demon and says to him, what's so powerful about you? You're meant to be like this Ra'im, this immensely powerful being. I don't see much power in you. And he responds, if you just loosen the chain, you've got me chained with this incredible chain with the name of Hashem, cut me a little bit of slack, as we'd say, just a little bit of loosening, and you'll start to see my power. And Shlomo Melech loosens it, and next thing he knows, he's thrown 400 parasos, he's in another place, and this demon becomes an imposter on his throne, and he is walking around Yerushalayim. He comes back and tells the rabbis, I used to be the king, and then he talks about all I've got left is my stick, and these are both psukim in the beginning of Koheles. So that tells us Koheles takes off from this incredibly disastrous moment in Shlomo Melech's life. And eventually, says the Gemara, they thought this is a bit bizarre. It's one thing if people walk around Yerushalayim saying I'm Moshiach or something like that, or I am the king of Israel. Okay, that's called Jerusalem syndrome. It's another thing if a guy says I used to be a king and now I'm a Nebuch. Okay, that was a bit strange to keep repeating this story. Let's do some investigation. And they investigate, and it turns out this guy on the throne is not Shlomo Melech, and they daven and they restore him, and there's a discussion in the Gemara, is he fully restored or not? What is the meaning of this Agadata? So the Maharal in the Chidushei Agados tells us something that echoes things the Rambam says and things that the Ramchal says. He tells us, in general, Agadas, we have to understand how Chazal write. But a point he seems to make is that you don't meet Shadim in real life. They're not physical, or you don't interact with them as a physical being looking like a human. You interact with them in the mental world and maybe the spiritual world. And therefore, you have to read this entire story in context of that obvious point, says the Maharal. Or maybe not so obvious point. Which means every interaction Shlomo Melech is having with this Malach is in his inner world. with this shade, I should say, and these shadim, is in his inner world. And to cut the whole interpretation short, what it means is Shlomo HaMelech understood that to build a home for God with the permanent presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Yerushalayim, the dream of his father who has unified the nation, and to have a national home of Hashem, not a portable one that moves between tribes, but one that expresses the oneness of Klal Yisrael, that requires, to do it properly, requires climbing to a level higher than the ordinary 6 days of creation into the 7th day of creation. It requires climbing above the world that is the realm of the demonic, into a space that is above all of that. That's where you can find the ability to build such a home of Hashem. And he succeeds. And everything that is demonic that can penetrate within him or with any of us, he has completely chained down with the Shem Hashem, with his connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is no voice left of negativity and destruction inside him. And he has reached the pinnacle. There's only one event in Tanakh after Yetzias Mitzrayim that is described in terms of its distance from Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that's his building of the Beis HaMikdash, 480 years after Yetzias Mitzrayim. In other words, this is the culmination of us coming out of Egypt, this Beis HaMikdash. So why does he turn to his demon and ask to undo it? And the answer is given to us in the beginning of Koheles. Because Shlomo HaMelech was looking around and felt 1 second. I am meant to be the end of history. We talk about Mashiach ben David. There was no more Mashiach ben David than Shlomo HaMelech. He was the literal Mashiach ben David. That's who he was. Mashiach as the son of David. And he was the one meant to fulfill the dream of building this Beis HaMikdash. And he's done it. And the world's coming to him learn from his wisdom by Perek Yudim Melachim, Malchus Shavaz. Everybody's coming to Shlomo. His wisdom's unparalleled. He's running the whole Middle East. Is like he's a powerhouse. And yet, this end of history has not happened. All the dreams of David and all the brachas have not come true. What does he do? So we have a chazal that tells us, and it's a pasuk we say every single day, right? Twice a day, put on every mezuzah and every tefillin. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, you gotta love Hashem your God, b'chol levavecha, with all your heart, b'chol nafshecha v'chol moedecha. What's b'chol levavecha? Why is it not written b'chol libecha? So it's a Mishnah in brachas, because you got to serve Hashem b'shnei yitzarecha. Says Shlomo HaMelech, I know how to serve Hashem with my positive drive. I wrote a whole sefer on it called Shir Shirim. I know how to be in love with Hashem. How do I serve Hashem with the other drive? That's what's missing. That's what the Gemara says. He turns to his dark side, to this Ashmedai, and says, I can feel you within me, but you don't have any power. What are you? How do I even serve Hashem with you? You didn't do anything. I've got you chained up. There's nothing left to do. I don't understand the place of turning evil into service of Hashem. And Ashmedai says, I can do this. I'll show you. But you got to understand who I am to use me for your service. But you have to loosen the chain. Loosen that connection with Hashem a little bit. It's too tight at the moment. You can only serve him with one Yetzer, not with both. Give me a bit of movement and you'll be able to use me for the good. You'll be able to understand the Inyan Ra, the matter of evil. You'll be able to turn it for the good. And Shlomo HaMelech tries it, and it is a catastrophe. And of course, we are at this point in Tanakh, in Perek Yud Aleph of Sefer Melachim Aleph, the absolute catastrophic end of last chapter of Shlomo's life, Shlomo HaMelech's life, when he's now, his wives, his 1,000 wives he had have gone, and he refers to them in Koheles actually, have gone crazy, and he's unleashed them, and the whole state is turning to Avodah Zarah. All this kind of relationship he's meant to have had with the nations around him has backfired totally, and now we become the diplomatic center for the united Avodah Zarah nations, and this is who we are. And he's got the nevuah from Achia HaShiloni. He thought he could do without the world of Shiloh. Interestingly enough, one of the first things Shlomo HaMelech does is removes Evyasa, who's the last Kohanim of Shiloh, right, descended from Noiv. He's the survivor of Noiv. Noiv Kohanim is when the Kohanim of Shiloh went to. He thought he could have the Kuna so united, everything united. And Achia HaShiloni says to him, no, this is it, it's going to be gone. We're going to split the Malchus, and within his nevuah is already effectively the fact that it's going to be at best the centuries, and perhaps it's never going to work out for thousands of years. It's a catastrophe. It's like Shlomo Melech climbed the mountain within meters of the top, and he's come sliding all the way down. And at that moment, says the Gemara, what's the pasuk that he says? What is the benefit we're doing with everything we work under the sun? When you put it all together, you realize what this moment was. This was the moment where everything that he had worked for, and everything his father had worked for, and everything the Jewish people had worked for 480 years, and the 400 years going back to Avraham before, all of it has just come crashing down. And his only conclusion is, we just can't do this. We just cannot generate this messianic end. We just cannot get history to where it needs to go to. And this place of hopelessness and darkness is exactly where he begins. The world is unchangeable. The more you try to change it, the more like an elastic band, it just pulls you straight back. And you're stuck exactly where you started, only in more pain than you ever had before. Zorach Hashem as the sun comes and goes, Al Makom Hashem, it just goes back. It goes south, it goes around. All the rivers go into the sea doesn't get filled. Nothing we do changes anything. Everything just exhausts itself. What was, that's what will be. There is nothing we can do to change things under the sun. This is where the Sefer begins. And you can see exactly why Chazal thought this is a book of contradictions. This is clearly going to be Shlomo Melech's chronicle of his journey from this darkest possible moment in life to how does he get out of it at the end. But Chazal assumed or thought at one point that the reason this is so full of contradictions is because he's writing the diary of his journey, and his journey begins in a dark place. That's maybe a wonderful book to learn from, but it's not a Sefer of Tanakh. Until they realized that although this was written in a difficult place, every single pasuk here actually hints, he recognizes there is a pathway out. And that's why every pasuk, I'm not going to go through each one, but you can look up the different midrashim and see it. From, as I said, under the sun we can't do this. He recognizes there is a world higher than that. If we can somehow find our way to it, then maybe we can do things. Okay, so in other words, he's writing in the language of the Gemara in a world where his dark forces, the Ashmedai, had taken over his brain. The imposter on the throne is all of his dark side. That's what's taken over. That's what's unleashing, letting his wives run the idolatrous world around him, and going with Chazal that it wasn't him directly, but whichever it was. That's what's causing the catastrophe and destruction that is wreckage all over the place. And of course, it comes, as we'll see later on, from the shortcuts he took, and we see them in Tanakh. He took a number of shortcuts. Not just the way the Gemara describes unleashing Ashmedai, the way it's described in Tanakh is he took shortcuts on marrying too many women, too much wealth, all the things the Torah had said not to, which he's done, if we're understanding the Gemara correctly, because he thought he has to bring about the rectification of the world. How do I rectify the world? Marry the idolatry. Unleash it, let it go, serve Hashem with all the dark energy of the world, be they the 1,000 wives, be they Ashmedai in his own inner being, be it everything. He thought he could do it, and he tells us that he thought he could do it. He literally says this, I was the king. I let my heart explore wisdom. All that was done under the heaven. I wanted to understand everything. By the way, you'll notice the word that dominates this Sefer, and you can see the entire work as a meditation on one Hebrew word, the word kol. Hakoil havel. I gave my heart to understand kol that's done under the sun. You'll see it all the way through. There's a time for kol all the way. Hakol kol. I'll show you a few examples as we go through, and obviously we're going to end with what hakol is all about. So if hakol nishma, that's what the Sefer really is about. I want to understand how everything works. I get the good, but what's the bad? Carries on the pasuk. What is missing in understanding the picture of kol? Who inyan ra, the matter of evil. What is this evil thing? How are we meant to serve Hashem with that one? That's what he set his heart to explore. Once you see what Chazal are doing, they're just literally reading the psukim like just fingers in a glove. That's all that's going on. So I looked at everything that was done. I can't get everything to work. And the minute he tries to let his heart do this and explore evil, it all fails. It looks like nothing can be rectified. What happens? I told my heart, saying, look, nobody can do this but me. I'm the one who's got the chokhmah over everything else. So I let my heart know not only the chokhmah I used to have, but hoilelus, sichlus, stupidity, frivolity, demonicness, negativity, anything. Yadati, and then Shagam Zerayan Ruach. Once I got there, it was a terrible decision. Keep a rov chokhmah, rov kaas, because now I'm in a place where the more chokhmah I have, the more pain life is about. The closer I'd come to rectifying the world, the more agonizing my situation is. The more knowledge I get now the more frustrating life becomes. So, Amarteni Belibi, I'm not going to go through every single posuk over here, but essentially he says, Tarti Belibi Limshech Bayain, I let my heart explore wine. Now, hearts can't drink wine, but a heart can explore wine, means think about simcha, think about positive things. V'libi Naig B'chachma, my heart is going in a way of wisdom, V'lechos B'sichlos, but it's still holding on to all the negative stuff. I'm trying to see what's the better pathway. And I remember Misbari Mechayim in my life, and now he goes back and says, you know what? Let me try and get out of this dark place by remembering all the happy times. Look what I did in life. I didn't just fail. Higdalti Masai, I did a lot of good things. Bonisili Botim, I built for myself houses. Which houses did he build for himself? The Bais Hamedrash, the house of God, and his own house, right? The earlier Prokim Menachim, Vav, Zion, Natati Li Kromim. I made these beautiful vineyards there. I made Ganas, Parades. We're just re-going over those two chapters of Melachim, all the things they did. Then eventually I brought in all the money and all the wealth and Skuras Melachim, Vamadinos. This is the later chapters, chapter 9, 10. Godalti, Safti, Mikolashai, Lafana Bishlam, even while I was achieving all of this, my Chochmah stayed with me. And at that point I said to myself, anything my eye wants, let me do it. I can use it for the good. My heart knew how to generate simcha out of all this. And then it led to me being left with nothing. When I look back at everything that I'd done, now, in other words, I thought I'd get myself simcha by thinking about this, but then all I look at is, now, yes, that was amazing. But what is all that worth if the entire thing ended up as a failure? And now he gets haunted by this. This is where I am now. Back to where I started with that first pasuk. The more I look back, the worse it feels, not the better it feels. I don't get comfort out of the fact that I nearly climbed Everest, because it only hurts me even more that I slid all the way to the bottom. And this is what he tries to do. When I thought about it, I'm jumping a few pasukim just because I can't go through the whole sefer. I realized, actually, if I think about it, one lesson I can learn is it was a mistake to unleash this Ashmedai, a mistake to play around with breaking the rules of the Torah and marrying 1,000 wives, a mistake to let myself go into the world of sichlus. I mean, come on. The Chacham, the one who sticks to proper wisdom, he's got his eyes in his head. The fool's walking in darkness. And I knew at that point, I wasn't bothered by the fact that we both die. But then my heart starts speaking. My heart is now corrupted. Amaritini belibi. Now my heart repeats and says, very nice, Mr. Philosopher. What's the point of wisdom? I can't get the world to good. They can't get the world to bad. It's stuck in equilibrium. Nobody can change it. It's just hevel. It's just all going to be gone. We're just going to all be dead. We're going to achieve nothing in life. We can't change history. We're stuck. I hated life. We can't impact the world. So Hashem, why did you put us here? Why did you give me the dream of building all this? What was it all for? I hated all the work that I'd done. The work that I'd done actually made me feel worse. I listened to the power of this pasuk. He used about 3 or 4 times in Koheles. I left it to the person who came after me. Do you know who that person really is? My new demonic self. He's taken my throne. All the stuff I did as the little tzaddik, what was it all worth? When the guy who takes me over. You'll watch how many times in Koheles he talks even about the king who takes over the other king. This is all a reference to himself. Chapter 4, Pasuk 13, chapter 9, Pasuk 14. It's all, again, I don't have time to go through everything. I want to give the structure so that you can take the chacham v'yachkamait. But once you start seeing this is the story, this just reads like a glove. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit because he starts to try to work his way out of this. And there's a pasuk which appears about 7 times in Koheles in different forms, and it appears for the first time at the end of the 2nd chapter. Ein tov ba'adam sheyochal v'shasan, and the way Chazal and most Rishonim learn this is, not there's no good to eating and drinking, there's no good but eating and drinking. In other words, let me start eating and drinking. V'hara es nafshay tov b'malei. This is a very dense pasuk that says something very powerful. If I can't change the world, there's one thing I can do. I can at least appreciate the little brachas that I have. You know, when Chazal want to teach us about appreciation, it's in food. From there we learn to make brachas on everything else. So Shlomo says, look, if I don't see any good, there's at least good. If there's good in nothing else, at least in food and then drink. So he starts to eat and drink and pay attention to how much blessing there is in that. I may be the laughing stock of the world. I may be the greatest failure who ever walked planet Earth. But let me at least focus on the joy I can get out of putting some food in my mouth. Thank Hashem I don't have hunger. Thank Hashem it even tastes nice. You know, Hazonas olam kulo b'tuva b'chein. Hashem he could have made us just have a biological urge like we do to go to the bathroom, to gobble down some sustenance, and we'd have done it, and that would work from an evolutionary perspective, and it would be fine. But he gave us things so that we got interaction with, and there's beautiful taste, and there's nice feelings when we eat, and okay, so I can learn to appreciate Hashem. Chein, the chesed, the rachamim. Okay, and then he starts another process. He says to himself, you know what? Haras nafsha tova male. Let me tell my soul about the good that I can find in the work I've done. I can see that there are at least, if I'm really looking for gratitude in this world, even in the darkest place possible, it's a very powerful emotion. And a very powerful place to recognize that even in my darkest sense of the dungeon of hopelessness of life, let me feel some gratitude. Maybe that can lift me. If I'm really noticing, actually, I've got still a lot to be grateful for. I have more than anyone else working this planet in this. And he comes to a little interesting recognition point here. For the man that's good for God, he gave chokhmah, das, and simcha. He basically says, look, I get it. I was the idiot to let idiocy take me over. And Hashem's essentially put it that way, that if I choose that, life can be incredibly painful. But Hashem's made it, when I just choose to focus on the good, there's a lot of good. So he ends chapter 2 with a place of Hakaras HaTov, and it immediately leads him into what we today call chapter 3. Again, these are not Jewish chapters, obviously. To La Kol, a new meditation on the word Kol, La Kol Zman Bais, a place called Bitachon. Maybe, says Shlomo Melech, my next recognition is if I can't shortcut the world to where it needs to go to, and I can't change the world, then maybe I should at least accept that if Hashem's given me so much bracha, instead of me trying to do it my way and wrecking existence, just step back and let Hashem run his world. He's got a time for everything. I was trying to bring something about that wasn't the right time. There's like Kol's man Bais. There's a time for everything. Tachas HaShamayim. Right? And again, every time he says Tachas HaShamayim, we're usually in the right space. And the famous Ace is Ace, Ledas Ace, Lamos Ace. There's a time for up and time for down, time for birth, time for death, time for planting, time for undoing planting, time for killing, time for healing, time for this, time for that. We have all of these things, time for loving, time for hating, time for war, time for peace. My Yisun Oise Bashel Omel. He returns to the pasuk he started with. So what do we achieve in life? Don't try too hard. Just let go. Let Hashem run his world. This is where he's up to now. I'm not going to go through all the rest of what happens in chapter 3, but as a shortcut, he then thinks I've got the solution, and he tries to talk to his heart to rectify it, but it doesn't work. Once again, his heart is so corrupted that in that space, it's going to get the better of him, but it doesn't overthrow him completely. He returns to some kind of balance, and by the time this chapter's finished, he can't conquer his negative drives, but they can't conquer him either. So he's achieved some stasis, some stability, where at least he can retreat to a place of Hakaras HaTov and a place of Bitochen. And this, by the way, never leaves the entire Sefer. Each layer Shlomo Melech develops, he keeps it there. He just has critiques of it as far as he thinks, and then he has to go to another level on top. It's a building block. But you should know, of course, that Koheles, we've explained why it was called Koheles through the Beis Hamikdash, because that was the whole thing that stimulated this Sefer in the first place. But it is also the other meaning of it's gathering every stage in the emotional and psychological and spiritual journeys of life. Because wherever we are in life, we're somewhere in Koheles. So the bedrock of everything is working every single morning on Hakaras HaTov, recognizing the good that Hashem does in the world. And this is the secret of the 100 brachas we're meant to make a day, right? Every move we make, everything we make, meant to be appreciative. And B'tochen, Hashem is running the world. Hashem, I can't control the world. If I was trying to control it, it would look very different, but I'm not trying to control it, because when I do try and over-control it, I just mess it up. You're in charge, Hashem. That's all I want. So why doesn't the Sefer end there? Because what we call the fourth chapter begins with this. V'shavteni ve'era. Okay, so I was in a pretty decent place now, but I looked around and I saw es kol ha'shukim. What about all the people being oppressed on planet Earth? Asher nasen tachas hashamesh. Again, whenever there's bad, it's usually under the sun. When it's good, it's under the heavens. We'll get to that soon. V'hinei dimas ha'shukim. There's tears of these people being oppressed. Ve'ein lehem menachim. There's people crying in this world and suffering in this world, and there's no one who can comfort them. So how can I just sit back and have bitochen? Very nice for me to have trust. Hashem's running the world, it's all good. You want to go and tell that to Shiva House somewhere? You want to go tell that to people who've got their kids hostage in Gaza? I mean, what are we going to do? Just have bitochen, it's all going to be okay. One of them can go to sleep at night more comfortable because we just said that. That's what Shlomo Melech says. It's very nice for me to sit there with gratitude and bitochen. What am I doing about all the people in the world in pain? I'm just meant to sit back and Hashem. You think Hashem put me in this world and showed me all this stuff just for me to sit back and ignore it? And I thought, let me praise the dead. The 11 at least dead died. I can't deal with life anymore. And better than all of those who have not yet come into existence, who've never even seen the bad in the world. And I looked again at all the work that we do. I've now got a new insight, and that is the world is full of jealousy. Gamza Havel Rosruach. It's also Havel. Just by the way, I don't know if you noticed this. How many references we just had to Gan Eden in there? Let's look at them again. I praise the dead. Of course, death and life is the core issue of Gan Eden, isn't it? Right? The tree of life and the tree that brings death. But Chaim Adeno, the word Eden, is there. And it comes up in the next passage. Aden Loihaya. We've got a lot of Gan Eden going on over here. Because, of course, the word Eden is a word for time. It's the garden of time. Okay, and then he talks about Cain. I saw this kinas ishmere'ehu. The world suffers because of the jealousy, but that's the word Cain. And the gamza hevel or usrach. Why would we bring all these little hints in here? And I think the answer is, if we recall what the Rambam tells us about the whole of Chet of Adam Harishon, because this is where he's bringing it back to the fore, over here. The Chet of Adam Harishon, the sin of Adam in the garden, says the Rambam. The Rambam asked the famous question. He says in the second chapter of the Meirah, he says, a wise person challenged him. How can it be a tree of knowledge should be a sin? Or at least if you call it tree of knowledge of good and bad, how can moral knowledge be a sin? And the Rambam essentially answers and tells him, he didn't read the Pesukim carefully enough, there's no tree, it's not a tree of knowledge of ethics per se, because the knowledge that Adam had beforehand was not the knowledge of an animal that doesn't know right from wrong. It was the knowledge of emes and sheker, of reality and illusion. God's will was emes, was reality. Everything else was illusion. The sin shifted things, and no longer do we apprehend the world in terms of reality and illusion, or even right and wrong. We apprehend it in terms of good and bad, which is a part of our vocabulary of aesthetics. Aesthetics meaning how things look, they sound, they smell, they taste, they feel. And in fact, our entire ethical vocabulary is borrowed, plagiarized directly from the vocabulary of aesthetics. We could look at something, hear some music, taste some great food, and we use a bunch of adjectives. We talk about it being good or beautiful or wonderful or amazing. And if we have a negative aesthetic experience, we talk about it being bad or disgusting or horrible or revolting. If we look at a morally heroic act, somebody who gives their life to save others or whatever, we'll talk about it being good, beautiful, wonderful, or amazing, the same vocabulary. If we hear about something morally horrific, we talk about it being bad, disgusting, horrible, and revolting. Why do we use the same vocabulary? And the answer the Rambam says is because, essentially, when we talk about things being tov and ra, good and bad, and that's what the tree was the knowledge of, good and bad, wonderful or horrible, in aesthetics, we don't describe the world in an objective way. We describe how it makes us feel. This music makes me feel great. This music's great. This food makes me feel wonderful. Oh, this is a wonderful steak or pizza or whatever. This makes me feel disgusted. This is disgusting. We are using a label to describe it when what we really mean is how it makes us feel. The problem with our moral feelings is it's exactly the same. If this makes me feel morally wonderful, like something feels good inside me and resonates, then I say, well done, this is great, you're doing beautiful things. If it makes me feel sick, I respond by saying it's sick or disgusting. We better hope that our moral feelings are roughly aligned with reality. We know they're not. We know they're pretty good for dealing with moral problems of less than 100 people. Our moral instincts were designed around the principle of empathy, and empathy is can by itself solve every moral dilemma within a small clan of people. If you can empathize with every single one of them, you can hear both sides of every story, you can come up with the right solution. The problem is when you try and abstract it to much larger groups of people, you can make all sorts of, you empathize with this one and not that one, or you start to judge a war by, can I put a screen and show you a horrible scene and it makes you feel angry, so now you hate the side that, even if they were firing at a bunch of terrorists over there, etc., 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 as we know all too well. We better hope that our feelings are, and of course when we're personally involved in something, forget it. It's an amazing thing. If somebody, the deepest problem with all of this subjectivity and this aesthetic sense, the deepest problem with the sin of Adam, of learning a world of Tov and Ra, is this. If that person makes me feel good, they become good. And if that person makes me feel bad, they become bad. And they don't have to have done anything to hurt me for me to feel bad. I could just be jealous of them. They could just be more successful than me. They could be more popular than me, but they make me feel really, really bad. And therefore, in my mind, they become really, really bad. That's it. By the way, the Nachash said this explicitly. The Nachash said, V'yisem kelakim, v'nifku choynei, the eyes of both of you will be opened, which means you will see reality through your little eyes. V'yisem kelakim, you'll be like God, lodas tov v'ra, knowing good and bad. You are now the God of the universe. You decide. You have an entire universe in your head, and everyone who makes you feel good is good, and everyone who makes you feel bad is bad. And this is why you can watch two people in an argument, and each one is utterly convinced the other one is the aggressor. It's painful. Right? Families can be torn apart on this. Communities can be ripped to pieces on this. Nations can be ripped to pieces. The world can be ripped to pieces. And you can literally see it. If you love somebody, they almost can't do something wrong. They were mean to somebody, your brain, that guy deserved it. They were teaching them a lesson. It was very important what they did. Conversely, if we don't like somebody, if we can't stand somebody, everything they do that's good, our brain becomes the world's greatest prosecution lawyer. They gave charity, they're just trying to look good. Someone says they're being so nice to me, they're just sucking up to you. See what we do? Isn't that true? And when we're in an argument with somebody, do you know how this can work? It's so, you're with somebody you're otherwise quite friendly with, they make a joke about you. Now, in person A and person B over here, person A's mind, they said they wanted to say a little joke about person B. They thought it was not going to be very, very harmful. A little joke. Person B didn't experience that as a little joke. That was, now you asked the person A how much units of Bad was at 1 out of 100. Person B, 10. So how dare you? Let me give you a lesson back. I'm going to make a comment back about you. But not going to be like you, 10 units of malice. I'll do 5. Right? So I'll make another joke back. Of course, person A doesn't experience it as 5. It's like 30. Whoa! I made a comment that was nothing. Just a little 1 out of 100. You're giving back 30 units. Let me give you 15. You gave me 10. I gave you 5. 40. You know. And next thing we know, they're both in this horrific argument where each one is 100% convinced the other one's the only one who needs to do the apologizing. I need to apologize for nothing that I did. I was just defending myself. And that can escalate into all sorts of catastrophic things. This is the Chet of Adam Rishon, the sin of man. Shlomo Melech says this is the problem of the world. And his solution, therefore, is Yesh echad ve'ein sheni. We can't live by ourselves. We have to think about 2, not 1. Gam bein v'ach ein lo. Now, of course, there's a lot of hints here. There's 1 and not 2. Doesn't have a son and a brother. Of course, this is probably referring to Cain killing Hevel, at least at the hinted level. But let's just go straight in. Tov mashnayim and echad. 2 is better than 1. Right, if 1 falls, the other can raise them. And it certainly goes on about the benefits of 2 over 1. And then he gets into many other things. Because of brevity of time, I'm going to jump. But you begin to see the power of the journey he's going on. How do I see the world from someone else's eyes? That's 2 over 1. And then he starts to want to work on how to see the world through God's eyes. Now, there's a number of more processes that take place in the chapters. But by the time he gets towards the end of the Sefer, he has come to the most profound realization. He has a whole chapter 7 talking, really... Okay, let's deal with the key points in I've just got to see how far to jump. I'll get to the point I want to get to is here. In chapter 9, he says, Kias kol zen asatias libi. Right, I get all of this, again the word kol, I gave to my heart, the tzaddikim, the chachamim, the spirit of serve Hashem, love, hate, everything. How does it all fit together? Hakol kasher lakol. Because again, that's what this sefer is all about. How do you see everything? Mikra echad tzaddik l'rosh tov, etc., etc. And then he comes to this. Ki mi asher yechuba al kol hachaim yesh bitachon. I spoke about bitachon earlier. I got a new understanding, says Shlomo Melech. There's such a thing as being connected to all of life. That's where true bitachon comes from. What does he mean here? And in fact, he goes on to talk about the chayim, the better to be a kelev chay, a living dog than a dead lion, than Arya Mace, the living know that they're going to die. Here, Chazal basically make the drasha that tzaddikim, even in death, are called living, and Rishonim, even in life, are called dead. What's the meaning of all that? And by the way, a few weeks ago we were reading the Rabba Milchas Tshuva on Rosh Hoshana, the book of life and the book of death, how he defines them as things that kind of only really close at the end of life, but every Rosh Hoshana. What all of this is saying is the following, I think. And I think Sar Chazal see it in the Midrashim and the Gemaras here too. Sorry, not two. The thing that's where I'm getting it from. So it's not I see it this way. I think this is my understanding of what Chazal is saying over here. There's a thing called the Book of Life. It was actually the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden, and it's called now the Book of Life. And it's also called by Shlomo Melech, Kol HaChaim, all of life. You see, once you realize all of life is one thing, and interestingly enough, the Vilna Gaon tells us there's a difference between the word kol with a cholon and kol with a komets. Even though they sound the same in the same letters, kol, whenever you say kol, you mean each individual. Ha-kol haval means every individual does nothing. Kol ha-chaim means the whole thing as one. In fact, he even changes the nusach in davening from v'chol ha-chaim yaducha. Each individual will know you, God, to v'chol ha-chaim. When it's all one, like we daven for on Rosh Hoshana, the whole world, the whole world becoming one, that's when we'll know you. Okay, you can debate which, really, if you want to, it's with Mashiach or Olam Haba, whichever one. But either way, Shlomo Melech is saying there's such a thing as Kol HaChaim. All of life and all of existence is one. It's one integrated whole. And here is the key. It's an insight we have much more metaphors and analogies for. I say analogies because of modern science. We now understand how emergence works, or we don't yet understand it, but we know how that it works. The famous proverbial butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world, and eventually a tornado happens on the other part of the world. But now imagine for a moment that a butterfly was trying to make a tornado. it would flap its wings its entire life and never get a tornado going. It just wouldn't happen. Because there's no direct cause and effect between the butterfly flapping and the tornado happening. Why? Because there's an intricate matrix of millions of causal factors. Each variable needs to be exactly as it is, the temperature exactly where it is, the air pressure, other factors, and together now the variable of the butterfly flapping its wings, had it not happened, may indeed have cascaded such that that tornado might not have happened. There's sensitivity to slight variation of inputs. But the butterfly alone is not the single factor that's determining it. It can't generate tornadoes. But if it makes sure, if it was told by the creator of the universe how to flap its wings so that the cascading factors will eventually always work for the good, it had better flap its wings in the right way. You know, it's like we live in a world where we cannot, through a single act, change the world. We can think we can, and sometimes we can make a big difference, like fire half a company, launch a war, but the overall outcome of history rarely shifts, even because of things we think are enormously big. If the pagan world's going to turn to monotheism, it can conquer all the monotheists in the world. It'll just delay the process by a few hundred years before it does. This is the big pictures of history are not things we have as much say as we think we do over. However, one way of looking at the world then is to despair and say, okay, so we achieve nothing. The other way of looking at the world is to say, 1 second. The opposite effect is also true. I may be a little butterfly somewhere and I think, what can I do? But if I flap my wings correctly when the moments arrive, that will be a factor in the final chapter of history. There's a powerful Hamedrash. It appears as a Gemara. Do I still have a few minutes? It appears as a Gemara and also Hamedrash in Rus Rabba. It appears, twice as Midrashim. It's a Hamedrash Rabba and a Rus. I forget which. I think it's a Vayikra Rabba. Anyway, it's definitely a Rus Rabba. And the Hamedrash says something really shocking. It says, amongst a few other people, had Boaz known that it was going to be recorded the gift he gave to Rus, he'd have given her gold. It also given her fattened calves and an amazing meal. And Hamedrash also tells us about other things. Aaron, Reuven. I remember when I was in yeshiva, Rav Moshe Stav was a Rebbe of mine in Binyamin. He said once just a simple insight which is so profound and really begins to put the whole of the end of Koheles into place. You know, if you were alive in the time of Boaz, certainly up to that moment in history, at that moment in his life, and you were a biographer of him, he's now very old, you know, according to Chazal, he's lost a lot of his family, well, right? But you could have at that point been a biographer of him and written a multi-volume biography. He was a Navi, right? He was a shofet. He was a political leader, a military leader, a spiritual leader. You could probably write a volume on all his Torah from his young age and how he did whatever, his Piskei Halacha. You could write a volume on all his nevuas. You could write a volume on his military campaigns, his social revolutions, everything. You would not have noticed in there that he once walked past an orphan convert girl and treated her nicely. It's just not the sort of thing that you or I would have put in there. And yet, in Tanakh, his first iteration, we call him Ivtzon, assuming Chazal tell us he's the same person. We do not know a single nevuah that he has. We don't know a single military campaign he runs. We don't know a single halachic decision he renders until he gets to the last chapter of Rus. The only thing we know about him up till that point in history is how he treated Rus in the field. And Chazal are telling us, all the big things you do can be gigantic, and you've got to do big things in life. That's part of what we're in the world for. But doing everything right, including the smallest detail, that could be the butterfly flapping its wings that brings Mashiach. That could be as important or more important than all the other things he did his entire life. And in fact, that's true. That leads to their marriage, which leads to the birth of Yishai to David to Shlomo to Mashiach. Do you understand the power of this? There's being mechuba al kol hachayim. When we realize that in every moment we are inputting into this matrix. We learned it. Hashem gave us a tremendous, in the challenge we had in the COVID year, Hashem gave us tremendous thing. A lesson of how easy it is to impact the entire world. You literally are 12 weeks, maybe a few more away from one sneeze at a time or one handshake at a time, impacting 7 billion people. Think of the converse. Think of when we walk into a building and we're frustrated and angry, and if we could just get our mindset into a good mind space and be kind to people, we might think, what difference does that make? I mean, even before we get to supernatural, the Reb Chaim of Volozhin and the mystical worlds, and the natural level, We smile at 5 people and give them a beautiful good morning because we're now in a calmer place. They're going to smile at 5 more people and give them a beautiful good morning. And 2 or 3 hours later, there might be 70 or 80 people having a better day. And 7 or 8 hours later, there may be 20,000 people having a better day. And 12 weeks later, 7 billion people will have been impacted by that. Of course, we're all being impacted by everybody all the time. We might sit in a room and work on our own ruchnius and nobody even knows about it, and we can't even tell the subconscious change it's made, even again without leaving into the deep spiritual things that actions can do. On a non-Kabbalistic level, on a simple level, we do not understand the cause and effect of how our actions ripple across history, but do each one right, and it will be in the final chapter of history. That's where Shlomo Melech gets to. So we're not helpless. We just cannot manipulate the world to run under a simple cause and effect. We cannot take shortcuts like he had done earlier in his life. He was doing it for the right reasons. He was sure, this is how to bring Mashiach, surely to bring all of evil to God too, get all of idolatry in. I know there's rules about how many wives and how much wealth, but that applies to everyone except me. Because in the end, that's what I got to do. Let me unleash Ashmatai. Let me listen with a ksil and that was the wrong thing. That was trying to get the butterfly to make the tornado, and it was a catastrophe. But now, just keep sending your bread over the water. Because in the end, in the Roiv HaYomim Timtzoena, when you get to the end of days, you will look back from that final chapter and say, oh my goodness, that little act of tzedakah, I thought I was nobody. I thought my learning makes no difference because I'm not the biggest Talmid Chacham on earth, and I thought my davening makes no difference because I can hardly focus, and there's guys who can daven 100 times better than me, and I thought my charity makes no difference because there's billionaires out there who can give so much, and what do my 5 shekel do? And I got to the end. You keep sending good into the world. You're going to find it. You get to the end of days, the Roiv HaYomim, you'll see it there. You will see the starring role you played in history. You will see that Boaz just treating her nicely changed the whole of history. Do all these things. And they talk, that in the morning sow your seed, but don't give up when you're old as well. You don't know which one's going to be the one. This one or this one's going to change the world. And this is how he brings every point in life. Have God focus. So can I deal with the ashukim, with the strugglers of the world? Absolutely. Let me put my arm around their shoulder. Can I change the world that way? No. And yes. Not the way I think I'm going to change the world. Are we mechuyev to try to change the world? Absolutely. Are we ever allowed to take a shortcut in doing so? Absolutely not. By the way, any of you work in stockers or in charitable things or in avodas atzibur, you will know this amazingly. This is a real test that comes to everybody who works in the community, which we all should be doing, trying to impact the world in whatever way we can, is you're always going to have some idiot in front of you who, if they would just get out the way, you could impact the whole world and make it better. It might be this annoying donor who's gone off to some other organization's advertising itself falsely, some stupid person in your office who just can't get the job done. And you know that actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be sending you, that person is the only reason you're there. How we treat that person, with the patience, with this, with that, that will change history. We got to try and change the world. But we got to try and do everything right, because we don't know which bread throw there. It might be the conversation here in front of me, here and right now, that will actually impact. And in the end, Shlomo Melech, it will. We can change things. We can impact the world. We've just got to do it by what's called Koheles. Gathering every person, gathering every moment. And this is how he ends his sefer. He says, Havel avolim amar Koheles. Hakol havel. It's true. Hakol, each individual, is Havel after all. None of them can change. No individual moment, no individual person can change the world. However, more than that, he's teach people. He looked for divrei chayvetz and he ended up with divrei emes. He wanted to find something that feels nice, but he found in the end, not the way he thought the world would be rectified, but the real truth. Soif davar hakol nishma. When you've heard everything, is not a retreat. It's not like, okay, forget the rest of life, let's just sit in a base measure doing mitzvahs. No! Every smile, everything, that changes the whole world. Every moment of life can be a mitzvah. How you eat food can be a mitzvah. How you talk to people can be a mitzvah. How you go on a tiyul is a mitzvah. We're always in the world. If we live a world of, like we started, gratitude to Hashem, bitachon that Hashem's got it all worked out, but He's put me in situations with people out there where I need to do things, then every moment is mitzvah. I thought just the big things are mitzvahs. Just the davening, the extra shmonos is the mitzvah, and the learning all night's the mitzvah, and the banging thereof on the floor's the mitzvah, and coming home and having this amazing kiddush is a mitzvah, and I come home and it's not prepared, I get angry because you ruined my amazing mitzvah. No! How we treat somebody in the home is the mitzvah. If you knew all of history depended on how would we talk to them. If we knew the way we walk in the street, everything is this. This is it. The whole of life is this. Ki es kol ma'asov. Now it turns to kol, the comets. Right? Sorry. Ki zeh kol ha'adam. This is the whole of humanity as one. That's what it is. The resurrection of Adam from Gan Eden. The whole of humanity is one. If we live a life that every moment the whole of humanity is dependent on what we're waiting for, and if we realize that we're part of this gigantic structure where every person matters and every moment matters, then what power we have. God will bring it when it's all one totality. That's how we serve Hashem, with the good and with the bad. All that's hidden, the good and the bad. What has this got to do with our situation? The truth is, Koheles has to do with every situation. Every emotion we feel is part of Avodas Hashem. It's okay to have simcha and simchas Torah, and it's okay to put it back and say, actually, I can't have proper simcha this yontif because I'm feeling the tsar of Yisrael. It's okay to do both. And of course, the ikar avodah where we can is to have simcha, but we're not having simcha of, I've drunk some wine, so I'm bouncing around in a shul. Having simcha to understand that me celebrating the finishing of Torah is ultimately what will be the good, the triumph of good over evil. It's not I'm bouncing around to enjoy myself. It's that I'm celebrating what Torah has meant through history and its ultimate power to vindicate the world and bring it to tikkun, and it's not a contradiction to the night before and the day afterwards being back in a world of tears and I can't sleep fully well at night because of other people's tsar. These are all part of service of Hashem. There is no 100% right way to be going through what we're going through right now. It's a big picture called Hakol Nishma. That's the only place the world makes sense. We don't need to work out, people are like, there's a simon, Hashem's doing this, it's a simon, He's now on our side. Oh, but today a few people died, and maybe He's against us. That's not how we work things out. I'll just tell you an amazing moment in the Megillas Esther. Mordechai has just been schlepped around all night by Haman. And you would expect, if you were Mordechai, I was Mordechai, we get off and go, oh, simon bracha for the world, it's clear Hashem's now on our side, I don't need to keep davening. You know what he does? He goes exactly back to the gate where he was in his sackcloth and ashes. His avodah didn't change. Do you know who figured the whole thing out? Knew exactly what was Haman. People who need to control the world need to figure out every moment exactly where they're at. We, says Shlomo Melech, need to stop trying to control where the world's at. Stop trying to read history. We're not Nevi'im. We've got to do the right thing in every moment. We've got to care about hostages here. We've got to care about families there. We've got to do things for the soldiers here. We've got to feel the tsar of Klal Yisrael here. And we've got to also step back and see the celebration of Simchas Torah is a celebration of the whole of history. It's what it will be like to be in the last chapter when we all sit round in one big ring. And you know something? The hostages and soldiers need us to be there too. They need us to travel to the end of history and celebrate in the way the Jewish people are celebrated across history and dance with all of them, the living and the dead, the suffering and the rejoicing, all dance together around the Torah. And we ask Hashem to be a Hoshana. We ask Him at the same time, the Vilna Gaon says every time you circle around in Hoshanas, that's the Ikka Simcha. And yet when we're crying in the most pain, they're the same thing, the pain of the present and the Simcha, the fact that in the big picture, in the end, it's all going to be there. And sometimes as Jews, we have to be in the big picture where it's all working out. And sometimes we have to travel back into the details where it's all so dark and lost. And all we have to do in every situation is realize that by injecting the right thing wherever we are and the right input in everything we do, the world will migrate to tikkun. And the topsy-turvy crazy world of right now is not the way it will be. But the heroes of the final chapters of history will be those who inputted good in moments. Obviously heroes who had the zechus to go and fight for Klal Yisrael without a question. But also those of us just trying to input good We'll never understand it, but the simcha that we have to have. The Rambam says this, and I'll finish this at the end of Hilchos Lulav. Simcha sheyismach adam b'asiyas hamitzvah avos hakel shetzivu b'hem avoda gedola hi. It's tremendous work to get to the place of joy in every mitzvah we do, and in loving Hashem. And he then says something very straight. So anyone who refuses to get involved in that is coming, basically says, coming from haughtiness, from gaiva. What's arrogance got to do with joy? Because haughtiness means I'm here to change the world. I'm in charge of the world. Forget it. There's no simcha in doing a mitzvah then. There's only simcha in achieving my fame and glory. And the simcha sheyismach b'asiyas hamitzvah is I'm here in this phase in history. And as Hillel says, if ani kan, hakol kan. If I'm here, then this is all I need. This is exactly where I need to be. And whatever I put into the world is going to ripple across the world and bring the tremendous good. So Hashem should help all of us to understand a Chag HaOsif, a Yom Tov, that is literally about bringing everyone together, to the Ir Shechu B'nai Yachtav, where literally the sukkah, the schach that we build is out of the psoilas, not out of anything that's been made into a kli that we understand, but out of all the things we would have rejected. The moments we thought were meaningless, the people we thought were meaningless, we bring it all together, and it's together with all those moments and all those people that history achieves perfection. Hashem should help us have a tremendous remainder of the Zman Simchosenu, not a contradiction to the tears we shed in the present, the simcha that we have over all of this, and that we should feel the joy every time we do the smallest mitzvah, to realize that it's going to impact everything. We're mechub el kol hachayim, and Hashem should help us through the zchus of those mitzvahs. We should be zeichet to see Yeshuas for Klal Yisrael, nechamas for Klal Yisrael, the releasing of all the hostages as speedily as possible, and peace for Klal Yisrael, safety for all our soldiers, and simcha for the world, and the real geula where we see the kol hachayim. Should we be Binyamin?